There was a time, not so long ago, in the measure of history, when an American evening began not with the flick of a switch, but with the soft scratch of a match. A warm glow from a kerosene lamp filled the small room, and shadows danced on the wooden walls as families gathered close, trading stories instead of scrolling through silence. Outside, the only hum came from crickets in the tall grass and the faint creak of a rocking chair on a front porch worn smooth by years of use. Roads were dusty in the summer and frozen hard in winter, and if a man wanted to visit a neighbor, he measured the distance not in minutes, but in miles of dirt and patience. Horses were the engines of the world then steady, breathing machines that knew the path home better than their riders did. Every journey began with the tightening of the reins and the steady clop of hooves that echoed through valleys long before morning light touched the fields. In those days, every sound mattered: the whistle of a kettle, the thump of a door, the crackle of firewood, each one a reminder that life itself had rhythm. Children learned early that light was precious. The day's work ended when the sun slipped below the trees and the night belonged to the stars. On clear evenings, families would sit outside, gazing at constellations, naming them with the same reverence their grandparents once gave to saints. There was a peace in the darkness then, a kind of quiet that only existed when the world wasn't always awake. Without electric lights, people knew the meaning of night. They listened more, dreamed deeper, and rose with the dawn, because that's when the earth itself began to move again. Kitchens smelled of wood smoke, and coffee boiled over a stove, and bread baked slowly, filling the house with a scent that lingered like memory. Every chore took time, and because of that, every small victory, a clean shirt, a hot meal, a mended fence, felt like a triumph. News came on paper, creased and smudged by hands that had worked the soil all day, and conversation stretched longer because no one had anywhere else to be. When the sun set early in winter, people didn't fight the dark. They accepted it, gathered closer, and let stories carry them through the long, cold nights. A man's word traveled faster than any telegram, and a handshake was stronger than any written promise could ever be. The pace of life was slower, yes, but so was the pace of worry. There was time to think, to talk, to simply be. Evenings weren't spent chasing time, but savoring it each moment, measured not by clocks, but by the warmth of company and the sound of the wind at the window. In that age, before power lines and engines, America was lit by faith, fire, and the quiet determination of its people. And though the world would soon change, those nights, those simple golden nights, would remain forever etched in the nation's heart, like embers that never truly fade. In those days before engines and electricity, a man's world ran on muscle, sweat, and the quiet partnership between his hands and the land he called his own. The morning began not with the sound of an alarm, but with the crow of a rooster and the slow rise of light spilling across the fields. Men walked out into the chill air, their breath visible in the dawn, carrying tools polished smooth by years of use, each one an old friend in the endless rhythm of work. The plow bit deep into the soil, the horse strained forward, and together they carved life out of the earth, one furrow at a time. There were no engines humming in the distance, no tractors to break the silence, only the steady groan of leather harnesses and a heartbeat of hoof against dirt. Women, too, rose before the sun, tending fires, baking bread, washing clothes in cold water drawn from a well that seemed a mile deep. Every meal came from labor, and every comfort was earned through patience. Nothing came easy, and that was what made it worth having. When a wagon wheel broke on a rutted road, a man didn't call for help. He fixed it himself, with whatever wood, rope, and will he had left in him. Journeys that take us an hour today could take a family 2 days then, over hills, through mud, and across rivers with names they whispered like prayers. In towns, blacksmiths worked by firelight, pounding red-hot iron into shape, while carpenters built everything from coffins to cradles, often on the same day. Trade was personal, built on trust and reputation. A man's name was his business card, and his honesty was his currency. The general store stood at the center of every community, its shelves filled with salt, sugar, nails, and news, all carried in by wagon once a month if the roads were kind. The post came slow, sometimes weeks late, and a single letter could make a man's day or break his heart. Travel was an event, not a routine. When someone said they were going to town, it meant planning, preparation, and the hope that weather and roads would show mercy. Children learned early what work meant: feeding animals, mending fences, hauling water, and by the time they were grown, they carried the same calm strength their parents did. There was no separation between life and labor. Work was survival, and survival was a kind of quiet pride. When night finally came, the body ached, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from knowing you've earned every breath of rest. Families ate together at wooden tables scarred by years of meals and memories, sharing food, stories, and the small laughter that made hard days easier to bear. Theirs was a world without shortcuts, a world where the simplest things, a loaf of bread, a repaired tool, a warm fire, felt like triumphs. And though they could not imagine the world we live in now, they lived fully in theirs each sunrise, a promise each sunset, a well-earned peace. The first time the lights came on in a small American town, people stood outside their homes in silence, watching the glow spill from windows like captured sunlight. Children laughed, mothers smiled, and fathers nodded proudly, but somewhere in that brightness, a few hearts quietly missed the soft flicker of the old lamps. The hum of electricity replaced the crackle of fire, and the nights that once belonged to stars were now shared with bulbs that never tired. Then came the automobile, loud and miraculous, shrinking the world in ways that horses never could, and suddenly, distance no longer meant solitude. Roads stretched like veins across the land, and the slow rhythm of hooves was drowned by the growl of engines chasing horizons faster than time itself. Towns that had once been full of silence now trembled with motion as factories roared and cities climbed higher with every passing decade. Progress was everywhere, shiny, unstoppable, intoxicating, but it came with a quiet price that only those who remembered the old days could truly feel. The porch that once held evening stories grew empty, the rocking chair still, as families turned their attention to glowing radios and, later, flickering screens. The world grew brighter, yes, but also louder, and somewhere between the hum of wires and the rush of wheels, the calm of the old life began to fade. Men no longer measured distance by the weariness of a horse, but by the ticking of a clock. Women no longer baked bread to share, but to save time, Letters became phone calls, and phone calls became noise. Quick, efficient, and hollow compared to the weight of ink on paper. The blacksmith's hammer fell silent. The general store closed its doors, and children forgot the creak of wagon wheels on dirt roads. Yet, for all the change, something of that old America still lingers. In the scent of rain on plowed earth, in the song of crickets on summer nights, in the steady hands of those who still build things themselves. Every now and then, an old man will light a lantern just to watch the flame dance, remembering how that light once meant everything. He'll sit back, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside, wondering when people stopped noticing how beautiful silence could be. The progress that brought comfort also brought distance, not just between towns, but between hearts, between moments once shared and now rushed past. Still, in the corners of small towns, beneath the neon and asphalt, the old America breathes, a memory, faint but proud, that refuses to die. It lives in old photographs, in barns still standing, in the steady rhythm of hands that remember how to make, not just buy.